think it's really important for people to understand how important it is, even early in your career, to start making connections and meaningful connections and nurturing them like a garden.
Welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here today with Susan McPherson. Susan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Mallory. It's a thrill to be with you.
What has been like top of mind for you lately? Like, what are some of the things in your work that are keeping you up at night right now?
We, in 2019, at the time, our client was NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action League. And we created a coalition between NARAL, Planned Parenthood, ACLU, and the Center for Reproductive Rights to push business leaders to step up, to speak out on behalf of women's reproductive health care and abortion, because companies were speaking out about everything else: climate, LGBTQ, immigration and refugee reform, gun violence, Black Lives Matter. But when it came to access to abortion, nope. And what was crazy was in 2019 and today, 78% of the American public wants Roe to stay the law of the land. So if you're a company, you shouldn't be so terrified. Yet they were. And so we were able to get 360 at the time CEOs to state that the abortion bans were bad for business, because they were. I mean, you're causing all kinds of challenges. And so we are resurrecting the coalition. We're going to be relaunching. And now it's all about how companies can protect their workers, because you're going to have 24 states at minimum that are going to automatically ban abortion. And that means if you have workers in those states, what happens, right? And so there's a lot business can be doing to protect. So that's one big thing. and been very all data, even though we have 18 clients, that's been top of mind. And I think it's just because it's so egregious what's happening for so many people. So that's one thing. But we have lots of other clients, and I'm still doing a lot of book talks, even though the book's been around a year. I think given the state of the pandemic and the fact that companies are very much having hybrid workforces, it still has a lot of relevance. So
yeah. I mean, I'd be super curious to talk about one, your model of connecting and how folks think about that. And I'd be really curious, you guys sit in a really interesting position because you do the consulting on the company side of things and on the nonprofit side of things. So you see the needs of both entities and probably can facilitate then a ton of collaboration, cross-sector collaboration. And I hear, and I've interviewed a number of people on the podcast who sit at different points of that intersection, but I'd be curious to sort of learn from you about what some of the biggest kind of communication barriers are between folks in the sector and how you all help and support that.
Well, there's been a lot of trainings over the years on how, for instance, nonprofits can go about creating partnerships with for-profits. And interestingly enough, is they often put themselves, they think they're at a disadvantage. And for years, I've always been a big proponent of, it's not what they can do for you, it's what you can do for them. And you need to go into these meetings with these companies with all the ways you can be beneficial, as opposed to going into these meetings saying, can you give me money? Right. And this is a little bit what you were saying earlier. I mean, there's for now, for companies, whether it's positive or negative, the vast majority of companies will only fund if there is an employee engagement opportunity, which definitely makes a challenge for companies, for nonprofits that are working in war conflict regions or disaster zones. It makes it a lot more difficult for an employee, let's say, to get on a plane and go fly and volunteer. But if there's ways that the nonprofit can be bringing ideas to the company that their employees can get involved in some shape, way, or form, it's going to be much more likely that the company is going to write a check. And it's a partnership. It's not just a donation. I mean, when you are building, the long-term kind of engagement, you have to think of it as you're both on equal playing field. So that's something we've always, really kind of come in and touted. The Women's Philanthropy Institute has been a client for now 4 years. So from the standpoint of understanding who's giving and in the women and girls space, as well as what are women and girls giving to, we're always on the cusp. We always kind of know because they come out with bellwether reporting. And then we take those reports and publicize them to various and sundry and try to also get them out of like the academia that they live in so that everybody reading can learn. And then this notion that every single one of us is a philanthropist when we, give $5 here, or $10 here, or $50 here. And, it's not the purview of only the uber wealthy.
I'm curious about this piece around kind of like donor behavior and the relationship between like the funder and the fundraiser in terms of who drives the behavior and the decision making. There's a lot in the nonprofit sector around like what are the behaviors of our donors that we look at, but oftentimes we don't look at that at the intersection of like what we did to cultivate that behavior. We're like, our donors behave this way, or they're interested in these types of things, or we look at like general donor reports. And I think what's really interesting about what you do is, my guess is you understand actually those connections a lot more intimately, like what drives companies to take certain behaviors, like what have the nonprofits done to sort of inspire certain behaviors of companies. And so I'm just curious, like, even when I say that, what does that make you think about in terms of your work?
Well, I've served on a number of nonprofit boards over the years, and when I have been on those boards and gone for corporate donations or corporate funding, I have had much more success around program elements, not certainly buying a table or any of that. Those days, I mean, yes, that still exists, but that isn't what companies want to do, right? They really want to figure out a way for their employees to be not only themselves funding, but getting excited about the particular cause. That they can use it as a connection building tool, so that they can use it as a means to drive engagement, so that it can get them, potentially thinking about new ways to be doing their jobs, and transferring their business acumen to particular nonprofits. That is what companies are thinking about. And, over the years, that is what I've seen. But I was on the board for years of an organization called Business Council for Peace, BPeace. And we were a network of business professionals pooling our acumen, our business, our individual strengths and business experiences, and then transferring those to women in conflict regions, Afghanistan, Rwanda, El Salvador, and helping these women build their businesses. We didn't donate. We would actually provide our knowledge and it was, each woman was assigned, like I shouldn't say assigned, each woman was part of a 3-year program. So it wasn't like we came in, said, hey, here's the help, and then we're leaving. So they had this kind of support system over 3 years. And then to fundraise, BPeace, the organization, would go to companies that wanted their employees to be training, right? And it was like an opportunity for them to galvanize their employees to step up.
And so that's that really special intersection of like, what is the need of the nonprofit? How does that intersect with the needs and desires of corporate partners? And then really building that like win-win relationship sort of from the ground up.
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting what you said about, I feel like there are a number of dynamics in the nonprofit for-profit partnership space where for-profit professionals are providing expertise to nonprofits. In that situation, it was like the beneficiaries of the nonprofit. But we see, like, when we see a lot of, skill-based volunteerism, for example, we see like for-profit. Yes. But you said something earlier when we were talking that I thought was really interesting around like the skills and resources that nonprofits have for companies. And like how to shift the sort of mindset. I think because we're so used to receiving support, be it time or skills or money, nonprofits, we lose this. We forget that we actually have a tremendous amount to offer companies and folks as well.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, and again, not every nonprofit, but you think about the role that perhaps you have an understanding of a particular geographic region. a population of peoples that you could help with, I mean, that type of stuff is invaluable to a company that's perhaps expanding to a region that they've never operated before, right? Or targeting a market, maybe a nonprofit, the Lower East Side Girls Club here in New York, right? I mean, it's girls age 8 to 18. Maybe Mattel wants to better understand that population, right? And so, it's like but this takes creative thinking. It takes right? And just looking at all the ways you offer value in the world.
Yeah, we do something inside Power Partners called asset mapping, where I have them think about what are all the things of value in their organization, all the skills, all the knowledge, all the things, because what I found, and I'd be curious what your experience was like here, but what I found was that a lot of the conversation was around scarcity and abundance. And they were like, there's too much scarcity mindset in the nonprofit sector. But then when you talk about abundance, people felt like abundance was so far away. And how do you go from feeling this sense of scarcity and urgency to being able to sort of access, or what's one step in the direction towards abundance? And for me, it was doing this thing called asset mapping for the organizations that I worked with. And so I'm curious, from a mindset perspective, or even how you warm organizations up to the idea that they have all of this value that maybe they haven't considered before. What's some of how you walk folks through that?
We just tell them.
I mean, for folks, is that a light bulb moment that they just haven't considered before?
Yes. I mean, I think also, although I will say nonprofits, we got to give them credit. They're very resourceful. And the ones who are run well, they are thinking that way.
Yeah.
I think also just, the pandemic, for instance, many nonprofits might not have been in the world of healthcare or COVID or disease or infectious diseases, but they would, there were many that were able to pivot to survive, right? So I think if you're not thinking this way, you need to at all times, right? All of us, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit.
Yeah. I mean, it relates a lot to the way that you teach network building and connection. So will you talk to us a little bit about that, about the book, and just about the sort of formula that you teach, the methodology, that you teach?
Well, the book is based on, it has 3 sections, but the underlying, let's say, theme under the 3 sections is always leading with how you can be helpful to others, which is a polar opposite of the way we were taught to network. And there's a reason I entitled the book The Lost Art of Connecting versus The Lost Art of Networking, because when you look up the definition of networking, it's icky in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It's kind of like, ew. It's also very transactional, and it's walking into rooms and thinking, what can I get? What can these people give me? What can I walk away with? And I want everyone to flip the switch and think instead, walking into the room, what are my superpowers and how can I be helpful to others? Right. And it's a little like the way I was just talking about with the nonprofits. What can they be doing? Right. And up their value. Right. We all have superpowers, no matter whether we're just graduating high school or approaching retirement. We still have them, and they're going to ebb and flow, and we're going to have many of them. That's the underlying kind of leading with how you can be helpful. The 3 sections are gather, ask, do. In the gather section, you connect with the most important person in your life, and that is you. And you do a self-assessment to think, what are my goals over the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years? And who do you want to connect with or reconnect with that are going to help you meet those goals? And vice versa, how can you help others meet their goals? You also think about in the gather phase what your superpowers are, because if you're going to follow my mantra about leading with how you can be helpful, well, guess what? You need to know what your superpowers are. And lastly, in the gather phase, you think about how you're going to do everything in your power to break that hermetically sealed bubble that keeps you in the company of people who look like you, sound like you, the same age, race, and color as you, when we know actually that the only way we are going to grow and improve and gain and add value to life is if we are interacting with people who aren't just like ourselves. The ask phase is learning to ask the meaningful questions of others so that we can find out what their hopes and dreams are. so that we can find out what their North Star is. And if we listen very carefully, which I learned in the research for the book, we're woefully bad at doing, but then we can get to the do phase. And the do phase is where you become reliable and responsible, and you follow up and you do the things you said you were going to do. So, and this is not a one and done. You're not going to do it like today and then be done. This is something that, and dare I say, with the world we're living in today, with the, you know, kind of fits and starts of coming out of the pandemic, it's a great time to do the self-assessment. So that's the gather, ask, do.
Okay, I love that. And I'm curious, from the gather work, are those fixed things? Or I was thinking to myself as you were talking that probably my list of superpowers pre-pandemic, I also became a mom kind of like right at the beginning of the pandemic. So a lot of identity shifts all at once, but thinking that the things I probably would have written down as my strengths and superpowers, you know, 3 or 4 years ago are quite different than perhaps what I would say about myself today. How often do you recommend that people do that evaluation, or is it what you discover? Does that really sort of stand the test of time and different life iterations?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something I've been doing for years and years and years. And I founded the company I run now 9 years ago when I was 48. And 90% of our business has been inbound since I founded it, which I don't think is the norm. And I'm not like, oh, good for me. I share that because I think it's really important for people to understand how important it is, even early in your career, to start making connections and meaningful connections and nurturing them like a garden. And I am so grateful now. You know, I've made a lot of stupid mistakes, but one thing I did was I started early building connections. It's kind of like, you know, when you think about your 401k or your SEP or your, you know, you want to start early and you want to be doing it. Wow, I just thought of that analogy. I've never.
I love it.
You know, we should treat our connections like we do our investments.
Yes.
Because you're investing for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really does, like, I really like that analogy too, because it really, everyone's growing, you know, and so those connections you make early in your career as well. And as you're nurturing them, as your career grows. And I found that with funders too. Like, I think, you know, we don't nurture a lot of really, key funder opportunities in organizations because they aren't popping out to us as the like major donor targets at the beginning. And we're missing huge opportunities to grow with funders, I think, in exactly that way, by building really meaningful connections with them earlier on in their journey as a philanthropist.
100%.
How do you suggest that folks like kind of prioritize? So I think about the work that you do, and then I think about, I can't remember who the author is, but who talks about kind of the concentric circles of networks and our capacity to keep certain amounts of people, you know, close, and how many people we can show up for. No, I'm just curious, like, how do you suggest people sort of balance all the relationships? Or do you find like what happens when too many people need things from you at the same time, or just that delicate balance between showing up for the people in your lives and holding space for yourself?
It's a very personal thing because everyone has different levels of what they can handle. And many people have many more responsibilities. You know, I don't have children, I don't have parents, and I don't have a significant other. So you have to say like, I have a little more bandwidth, right? But other people at different times of their lives, I mean, last year I had a lot of health issues, so I couldn't be as helpful Susan. So I think it's one, you know, it comes down to what your goals are, and then being intentional about what are the concentric circles you want to build. And I also, you know, when people think of, oh God, I can't take another meeting. Well, sometimes it isn't all about a meeting. It might just be, you know, giving someone a shout out on social media. Or it might just be, you know, suggesting a newsletter or a podcast, right? So I think sometimes we think, oh God, connect, like I have to sit down. And so, you know, it doesn't have to always be such a big lift. And I'm a big believer in two things. One, I take notes when I talk to people so that I have a reference point. And that's extraordinarily old fashioned and archaic, but that works for me. So whatever works for you. And I take pictures when I meet people so that I don't, you know, it's easier to remember who they are. So that, you know, a month from now, if I'm scrolling back in my pictures, I'll be like, oh, I meant to get back to that person, right? And I think also it's, you know, calendarizing. Like if you went to an event and you met a couple of people, put down your calendar like next Wednesday, just so if a week goes by and you didn't respond, you will have that saying, right? But I don't have like this system of keeping in touch. I'm blessed with a very good memory, but I have a rule of thumb. Every morning I reach out to 3 people, the first 3 people that pop in my brain. And they may be people from 20 years ago, and they may be people from last week. And I'll just be like, thinking of you, hope you're doing well, or sending some love, like nothing. And I don't have like an agenda other than like, hey, I'm here kind of thing. But like, just putting a bit of joy out in the world.
Yeah.
And when people ask me how I have time, I'm like, well, I have time to brush my teeth. So, you know, there's ways if you could, you know, just set yourself up the goals. And this is a muscle that if you do it, you will continue to do it. And it will come back to help. And there's going to be times when you can't because, you know, life calls. But it's just, these are good habits to get into.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I learned this from you, but I've been doing so much more like when someone pops into my consciousness, sending them a little message, just saying, you know, I was just thinking of this thing happened, or a little voice note, this thing happened. I was just thinking about you, just wanted to send you some love, like, and like just having those moments without any agenda or no, like trying to catch myself from doing we should catch up soon. Or because I think sometimes I would hold myself back from those little things because I felt some level of obligation to offer some bigger engagement. And that, especially during the pandemic, without childcare for a big portion of it and all those things, I had less capacity and just had to really shift the ways that I sort of offered my love or support or cheering on, and found it to be a really like beautiful practice.
Yeah, I love that.
What are some things like when you, so, okay, I'm curious what you think about this, and you might not agree at all. But one of the things I've been really grappling with recently is the word transactional and the way we use it in the nonprofit sector. Because I think sometimes we use the term transactional to mean don't talk about money, but we use it in situations where the fundraiser is being asked to raise money, maybe not in that very specific meeting, but the activity that they're engaging in has the ultimate goal is being measured against the money that they ultimately raise from that interaction. And so they take transactional to mean to kind of like bury the lead. But then they go into these meetings and they're still holding the goal around money, like top of mind in their consciousness, but they're not like saying anything about money. And then it can feel like this really disingenuous interaction. And I think you teach a really beautiful way of not being transactional. I think by having that helper, like I think that the baseline, the like bottom line of your work actually shifts that piece of the puzzle, right? It like shifts people to be able to genuinely show up to an interaction without it being transactional. But I'm curious, like from a fundraiser whose goal around that meeting ultimately is transactional, are there ways for them to talk about money earlier in the process that still don't have that sort of like transactional element, the feeling of it being transactional? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to try another way. So I'm wondering if like being transactional is always about talking about money, or if there are ways to not be transactional and still talk about money.
Well, I think you can talk about money and not be transactional.
Yeah. Okay. So what does that look like? Like in your mind, what are the ways to do that?
Well, first of all, you shouldn't make it just about the money. Okay. I mean,
yes.
You know, and yes, I get it. If that's your ultimate goal, but there's other things that people can be doing in addition. You know, when you gather a room full of people who high net worth individuals, they have lots of other ways they can be helpful in addition to the money. Okay. They have networks. Okay. They have knowledge. They have family members. They have, you know, gifts in kind, like they have so many things. So if you're fundraising from these people, your best bet is to forget about the money for now and really just build like long-term relationships with these people so that you can be a resource to them. Money should be like Yeah, I mean, of course it's top of mind. They know why, but in the end, they're funding you not because they are like excited about writing a check. They're funding you because it fills a niche or a need that they have. And they want to be part of a community. So you as the fundraiser should be doing everything you can to build bridges between these people, right? So to me,
Yes.
it's like, state the obvious. We're all here because we need to raise money. But in lieu of that, we have so many other goals.
Yeah. 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 Okay. I love that. And I don't think I was asking it clearly at all at the beginning, but I think like that piece is so important around like either if you can't forget about the money, saying something that says like, yes, our ultimate goal is that we're finding a pathway to create this program together or solve this problem together or do that thing. And money might be one element of that. But today, what we're here to focus on is building a relationship, seeing if there's alignment around our goals related to this. Like, we want to get to know you better. We want to show you this thing. And so I think sometimes like fundraisers are so afraid, or like, I think what you said is so important. Everybody knows. Like, I think sometimes fundraisers feel like they've like tricked the person to go out to lunch just because. And it's like, folks understand what's going on. So, but how can you be transparent about that, but not make it transactional or make it all about the money and be able to forget about the money because you are trying to figure out all these different ways to sort of serve each other.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, like, do you see a challenge with that in fundraisers that you work with?
I don't think so much now. I think probably 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So like when you think about your work and trying to build these bridges between different people, different sectors, create opportunities for folks to build their own bridges, what is your North Star? Like, what do you in 10 years, what do you hope to see?
God, well, I'll be 67. I have no idea. I think, I want to make sure that I'm continuing to grow the company I run in a way that is nourishing and exciting and exceptional for the people who work there. I mean, to me, that now that we're 9 years in, and we've had explosive growth in the last year and a half, I'm turning my attention to kind of stabilizing and ensuring that my employees just absolutely love working at the company, which is really hard during a great resignation. That is something that I'm really, really focusing on. And obviously coming out of the pandemic, I want to get back to traveling. So maybe not exactly the question or the answer you were looking for, but that's kind of what I'm thinking, and put in a bit more stability over the last 2 years. When you have that kind of explosive growth, it's hard to be like stable.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I actually am. I mean, I feel like you see inside so many different companies who are looking to create value or show up in meaningful ways. And so I'm curious, when you think about creating a nourishing work environment, what does that include? Like, how do you define nourishing?
Pay people well, but also give them clear lines for ways they can grow. Give them ways that they know, so they have, be transparent. Because we became a B Corp, we had to be far more transparent. Now, all of our job postings on our website have salaries. So there's a much, complete transparency in the company. And that's a huge kind of step forward. Offering better as best benefits as we can, 4 months paid leave for, family leave, which is unusual for a small business. Giving many as summer Fridays, these are things that make it a more enriching environment. And we just had a retreat last week, which was the first time everyone got to meet in the last 2 years, and doing more things like that, because people are located disparately.
Yeah. Would you say that like your staff is that like creativity is something you're consistently trying to nurture in your
Absolutely.
staff?
And
Yeah.
And at our retreat, we had a afternoon where we created vision boards, where we were using paint and, all sorts of things we could stick on and glue, and, so that was a good opportunity to exercise that.
Yeah, when I was looking at your website and just the work that you do, that was the word I just kept thinking about, was just creativity, just the way that you show up to these different partnerships, and I think help everyone think outside the box around how people can solve problems together, which I think is just a really inspiring model to witness happening in the world.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like when you think about companies and how they can, like the value that they're seeing in being more creative about the way they show up or the way they center value in their work, what have been some of the most kind of surprising, inspiring, and maybe even hopeful things you've seen?
I think it's companies who are speaking up about things like gun violence, about climate, but also, in addition to speaking up, doing something about it. After George Floyd's murder, you had all these companies saying, we're giving these funds, but in a year later, 2 years later, how many of them have made definitive changes within their organization? And that's something, I want to see more of, but I do feel like we're starting to see more, because employees and Gen Z are holding them accountable.
Yeah, I think it's demonstrating some tremendous like collective power to move the needle in big ways. And it sounds like from what you were saying before that companies are really starting to see like the value and importance in ways where maybe we've separated personal, or they always say like the personal is political or whatever, but companies, I think for a long time were sort of distancing themselves from making statements or drawing a line around certain sort of political issues. And now that as many more things have happened and companies have taken a stand, we've watched that shift in a number of ways. Do you feel like companies are doing that more comfortably, or there's still a lot of like internal resistance?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is still internal resistance, and and they're always, because companies are inherently conservative, but there's going to come a time where transparency is going to be the normalcy.
Yeah.
So I definitely think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah. Do you feel, I mean, I know you and I are talking in like a particularly challenging few weeks.
Yeah.
Do you feel like overall hopeful about the direction that companies are moving, that partnerships are moving? We have a lot of work to do.
I have to keep hope, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point of doing all this work if I don't hold hope? Right? I mean,
that's true.
No.
Yeah.
But we have to be relentless. We have to keep pushing them. We have to, they're part of our society, and then, they need to be participating as part of society too.
Yeah. I was going to ask you sort of what, like for folks who are listening to this, who want to do one thing to help advocate, what would you recommend they do?
Vote. I mean, there's so many people in this country that don't vote, and I get it. It's not easy in many, depending on where you live and what kind of job you have during the day, but vote. When you don't vote, and then if you criticize, it's, woe is you, right? I mean, we need to. And if you do work at an organization, speak up. Go to the powers that be. And I realize, again, I'm saying that from a position of privilege. But if you are comfortable doing so, I encourage you, if you're with a company that has employee resource groups, join them, because that helps build power. We are seeing the return of unions, which I think from the standpoint of employee power is really important. Because we've seen this just dramatic rise in executive pay and C-suite pay, and we haven't seen the same rise, and it's not sustainable. So that is an entry point for unionization. So, employees now have more power. So if you do feel fearful, just know that the wind is in your back.
Mhm.
And if you work for smaller organizations, go right to your CEO. I mean, with ideas, because
Mhm.
in the end, yes, you're always going to anger somebody. But if you look at things like, LGBTQ and immigration reform, the vast majority of people are, on the right side of these things.
Mhm. Yeah, are on the side of progress. And the other thing that I've been thinking about is that your work around connecting, for nonprofit folks who are listening to this, I mean, I think that's another value of the advocacy work that they do to build partnerships is sometimes they're creating an opening for a company to explore an issue area or a partnership area that they haven't figured out necessarily how to tap into yet or how to make a difference in yet. And so I can imagine that's a really like powerful and meaningful way to do work as well.
100%. 100%. And, nonprofits can offer guidance to companies as they're traversing. I mean, when you look at some of, before marriage equality passed, you had, GLAD and HRC almost being consulting firms to companies to help them.
Mhm.
And they're nonprofits. So, the same way IRC, with International Rescue Committee and others are helping companies understand how to manage the Ukraine crisis and the war in
Mhm.
Ukraine. See, so nonprofits can do a lot with the skills that they have and the experience they have.
Yeah, I was really surprised. That was something I like didn't consider earlier in my career and in my last leadership role at a diabetes education and advocacy organization. That was when I feel like I first ventured into that world, and it was a pretty small organization. Like it wasn't some sort of like huge organization. I was the only like full-time staff person when I was brought on. We grew the organization a lot, but there was a ton of corporate advocacy work that we did behind the scenes in building our partnerships and in just helping companies understand, because I think more often than not, there are shared goals that we have not recognized.
Yep, 100%.
What is something in the sharing of your book, like in your book getting out into the world and still like reverberating in so many ways? What has been one of the biggest surprises of that work being shared?
That it's still on, people are still interested. It's been a year and I'm still getting, requests for book talks. And, as much as it was so challenging to launch a book during the pandemic, I never got to go physically and give talks or go to bookstores or any of that. I am also blessed because of the pandemic, because the subject matter stayed relevant, and it might not have had it been, just any old book. Not that
Mm.
there's anything wrong with any old book, but I meant about the subject matter, not to
Yeah.
diss all my sibling authors. But yeah, and just the amount of amazing people I've met because of the book, all
Yeah.
the rooms I've been able to be invited to, and ultimately people that, again, I mean, I'm gregarious on meeting people, but the book opened up so many new doors. So
Yeah.
that's probably like you.
Yeah.
I would never have met you if it wasn't for the
I
book.
know, I know. And I mean, I love, there's something really special, I feel like, about providing that like methodology to folks. I mean, during this time too, probably during a time where we felt more than ever like we didn't have a lot to offer or a lot of capacity to give or necessarily ways to help. Or for me, I think it really, like I said before, with even that little strategy around sending people love or like seeing them or sort of recognizing them in moments where they would pop into my consciousness, I think the pandemic for me definitely made me feel like I have less capacity in a lot of ways. And so I felt less helpful. And I think it also really helped me reframe that it doesn't have to be this massive way necessarily that you're helping everyone, but there's something that you have that you can offer that folks around you need, and just being more generous with that, whether it's connecting to people or sharing a link to something or ping me when you need this. Like it really did sort of open up sort of the space for me to even think more creatively about what does it look like for me to offer, and to start with that internal work around Like, what do I have that's valuable to folks who need it?
Mhm. Always. And that's where that, thinking about what your superpowers are, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you always know that your superpower was connecting?
Yes, except it wasn't until 2007 that I had the guts to share. I went away for a weekend with 7 of my dearest friends, and we went up to the Catskills. And the goal of that weekend was by the end to be able to articulate our elevator speeches. So that Sunday afternoon, I finally said, I'm Susan McPherson and I'm a serial connector and da 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 da, and it was like, yay, I said it. And then I almost wanted to pee in my pants because it sounded so ridiculous. But then 16 years later, I wrote a book on it. So, but my suggestion there is when you are fearful or don't have the confidence in your superpowers, ask the people around you, people who can mirror back to you. Ask your loved ones, ask your friends, ask your dog. Speaking of my dog, I'm going to have to jump soon because I have to go take her for a walk.
No problem. So we usually end with giving folks, if they want an opportunity to highlight a nonprofit that is really near and dear to their heart or that they're thinking about particularly right now, and then to tell folks all the ways they can find you and work with you and buy the book.
I love it. I love it. Well, I have so many nonprofits that I'm passionate about, but how about the 19th? The 19th News is an independent nonprofit. It's a newsroom that reports on gender, politics, and policy. And they were founded February of 2020, and then grew exponentially during the pandemic, because we know the pandemic really inextricably harmed women in much greater ways than the rest of the population. So the news that the 19th produces every day is vitally important, and it adds to the public discourse about the issues that are most important. So you can check it. It's the 19thnews.org. And then people can find me everywhere on the interwebs at Susan McP1. My last name is McPherson. And my company's website is McP Strategies, McPherson Strategies. And lastly, the book is available anywhere books are sold, The Lost Art of Connecting.
Amazing. And I'll put all the links for everything below. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a joy. Thank you, Mallory. And thank you for the good work that you're doing. And when this is live, and I'll be happy to share and encourage folks to listen.
Thank you so much.